Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something genuinely fascinating, a deep dive into the world of paranormal investigation in Pakistan. We're looking at the wild claims, the timeline of events, and some incredibly specific encounters detailed in a recent interview from the Dar Hakikat podcast. It features Shazi Ali, who's a creator that built this massive following by documenting his late-night investigations into the unexplained. And look, whether you're a hardcore skeptic or a total believer, the way these reported events escalate makes for an absolutely captivating case study in how paranormal lore is explored. We've got a lot of incredible ground to cover from the source material, so let's get right into it.
So let me ask you a question that kind of challenges our basic survival instincts. Would you intentionally seek out the dark? Lock yourself in a haunted room for 4 days just to see what happens? Well, according to the source, Shiji Ali's origin story didn't start with fancy cameras or a YouTube channel. It actually started when he was just 10 or 11 years old at his uncle's village. There was this specific abandoned room that he said just radiated these haunted vibes. His family explicitly warned him to stay away, basically telling him that if he went inside, he might never come out. But as we see with so many of these investigators, being told no just completely fueled his curiosity. He wanted to push the boundary and see if those scary stories were actually real.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline because this is where his super methodical approach actually begins. A 10-year-old Sheji didn't just take a quick peek inside. He literally conducted a 4-day experiment. Day 1, he unlatches the door, locks himself in the dark for over an hour, and gets absolutely nothing. Day 2, same thing, nothing. By day 3, it's still empty, and he's starting to think his family is just making the whole thing up. But on day 4, the environment completely shifts. In the dim light, he spots a snake hole he hadn't noticed before. And suddenly, this massive, jet-black cobra emerges and coils itself right on a table in front of him. He describes it like an actor hitting its mark, just completely still, watching him.
Now, the reaction to this cobra is probably the most surreal part of this whole origin story. Shiji is trapped, he's terrified, and he starts making a ton of noise until his family literally breaks the door down. But when his uncle walks in, he doesn't panic. He doesn't grab a stick or a weapon. Instead, the source details that the uncle speaks directly to this lethal snake. He just says, "Leave him. Go away," using this incredibly calm, familiar tone, like you'd use with your own kid. And according to Shiji's account, the snake just obeyed. It slithered right back into its hole and vanished. That specific moment, where absolute terror met this bizarre, inexplicable control, permanently opened Shiji's mind. From that day on, the fear was gone, completely replaced by a drive to investigate the unseen. And, that childhood fearlessness translated directly into how he works as an adult. Think about it. When most of us visit a graveyard, it's during the day, right? It's for mourning or for prayer. But Sheji's approach at the Saki Hassan graveyard completely flips that script. He and his team roll up at 2:30 in the morning, and in a move that, let's be real, defies common sense for most people, he actively chooses to turn off his primary floodlights. He intentionally plunges the team into pitch darkness because he theorizes that intense light might actually stop the entities from manifesting. He wants them to show up entirely on their own terms. And according to his team, that darkness actually worked. During one of these investigations, a teammate spotted something absolutely massive. They reported seeing 2 giant eyes blinking way off in the distance. But the chilling part was the scale of it. The eyes were spaced so far apart, they basically spanned the width of a large room. It made the entity seem like the size of a dinosaur, just looming over the graves. Imagine standing in the pitch black and seeing that. When they later showed this footage to senior investigators, it was identified in local paranormal lore as a dahakal, and whenever they tried to walk towards it, those massive eyes would just retreat, always keeping this fixed, haunting distance.
So the crucial point is how Sheji actually responds when things escalate. After feeling like a third presence was stalking his team, he decides to go back into the Saki Hassan graveyard completely alone. His team stays outside the boundary walls. He walks in, isolated in the dark. And then he reports hearing the distinct metallic chime of a single pile, an anklet, echoing right beside him. So he starts asking questions out loud. Are you here? Are you a threat? And in response to his voice, that disembodied anklet actively chimes back in the pitch black. He claims this interactive, real-time auditory encounter was captured entirely on his live feed. Just imagine the sheer terror of hearing that.
This brings us to a really major escalation, detailed in the source.
the Gadap Haunted House. And we aren't talking about a spooky little room here. This is a half-constructed, ground-plus-2 mansion sitting all by itself on 60 acres of land. It was abandoned because laborers allegedly fled in pure terror. The second Shenji's team arrives, the environment turns completely hostile. First, bats start swarming their equipment, totally drawn to their lights in the dark. Then, they spot this distinct, green-colored entity just staring down at them from the roof. But here's the kicker, the architectural impossibility. They had already checked the building, and there are literally no stairs. There was no physical way for anyone to get up to that roof.
At this point, the tension just snaps. They're trying to figure out how to even reach this entity when the entire atmosphere shifts. Adil, who is described as this highly experienced senior investigator who almost never loses his cool, suddenly just screams at the team. He yells, "Run, don't stop, run." And it wasn't just a retreat, it was visceral, absolute panic. They scramble away from the mansion, plunging blindly into the dark acreage. They are so disoriented by the sheer terror of the moment that they actually lose their way back to their cars. It's this raw, chaotic moment that really underscores the psychological toll these investigations take.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the taxonomy of the paranormal claims we're seeing. We aren't just looking at your run-of-the-mill ghost stories. There is a very distinct categorization happening here. At Saki Hassan, you've got massive visual anomalies like the Tahakel, right alongside the interactive audio of the anklet spirit. Then at Get Up, it's a localized green visual entity occupying a physically impossible space. And then at the Balochistan border, the source describes entirely different manifestations, dwarf-like figures and white shadows that literally merge straight into solid rock walls. The sheer diversity of these encounters is staggering. And speaking of that location on the Balochistan border, it holds a particularly dark history. The team traveled to this highly restricted, ancient graveyard nestled right between two villages and two mountains. The estimated age of this site? 1,400 years old. To put that into perspective, it's so ancient and guarded by locals that outsiders are strictly forbidden from burying their dead there. And the graves themselves, they're described as being incredibly abnormal, spanning 12 to 14 feet in length. It was right there, among these massive ancient graves, that the team reported seeing glowing red eyes watching them from the mountain peaks, and white shadows just darting across their path.
But according to these accounts, the paranormal isn't just something you see or hear. It actually becomes dangerously physical. After 3 hours in that 1,400-year-old graveyard, the team decides to pack it up right before dawn. They get into their car, but it won't move. Shiji describes the vehicle as being suddenly pinned down by this massive, unseen weight, like tons of pressure had just been dropped right onto the roof. The tires sink deep into the dirt, and one of them instantly pops. 10 grown men pushing with everything they had couldn't budge this car an inch. It was only when their local guide started pleading loudly and Cindy, respectfully asking the spirits to let them go, that the crushing weight allegedly lifted and they could finally push the car free.
Now, if a car being crushed by invisible weight wasn't physical enough for you, let's look at their Karangi graveyard investigation. While they were there, they found a fresh, highly suspicious clay pot sitting right among the graves. Shiji felt like someone had literally just placed it there and ran off when the team showed up. Knowing the rules of occult items, they didn't touch it with their bare hands. Instead, the senior investigator neutralized it by pouring water over it, and then he broke it open. So I want you to think about this for a second. What do you expect happens the exact moment you break a suspected cursed object in the middle of a graveyard? And this brilliantly illustrates the risks they claimed to take, because the retaliation was immediate. The second that bot shattered, revealing all these weird hidden insects and seeds inside, the environment fought back. The team claims they were instantly pelted with stones. But it wasn't just from one guy hiding in the bushes. The stones were flying in from all angles out of the pitch dark. Unseen screams started echoing all around them. And honestly, the most bizarre detail? Plastic water bottles wrapped entirely in black tape started getting hurled at them from the shadows. It was a completely coordinated, aggressive physical assault that forced them to evacuate the graveyard entirely. Let's move to and see how this builds into the broader reality of what these creators do. It is incredibly easy for someone sitting comfortably at home to type a comment saying, "Oh, this is all fake, it's just drama." But the host of the original interview points out a really grounding truth. Even if you are the biggest skeptic on the planet, you have to admit, these guys are physically walking into highly dangerous, totally isolated areas at 2:30 in the morning. Actually, Shudgy mentions that during one investigation, they were confronted by armed robbers, and they only made it out because a local guide happened to recognize one of the thieves.
The physical exhaustion, the real-world criminal threats, and just the sheer courage it takes to stand in a pitch-black graveyard for 3 hours, that's a reality you simply cannot fake. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. We've traced this incredible timeline, from a 10-year-old staring down a black cobra to a team fleeing impossible entities and enduring physical retaliation in 1,400-year-old graveyards. The source material paints a vivid picture of a world where the veil between the normal and the paranormal is incredibly thin. So armed with all this knowledge, knowing the very real physical dangers and the terrifying claims of what lurks out there, if someone handed you a camera tonight, would you have the courage to step into the dark? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive gave you a totally new perspective on the intense, unseen world of paranormal documentation.